The first thing Laura felt was not fear, it was emptiness, as if her own body had given up on supporting her soul. The diagnosis still echoed in her head, but the voice that hammered the most was not the doctor's. It was Gustavo's. How long does she have? How could someone ask that in front of their wife? As if they were already planning their life after her. The smell of the hospital mixed with his perfume, the same one she had bought months ago, thinking it was a special gift. Now, it felt like nothing more than a cruel reminder that she was disposable. In the days that followed, Laura tried to hold on to something familiar, something that would make her feel like her life was still hers. But Gustavo had already made his choice. He arrived late, avoided looking her in the eye, and any gesture of affection felt like an uncomfortable obligation. At first, she tried to justify it. He's scared. He doesn't know how to deal with this. But when she found a faint trace of lipstick on his shirt, a reddish shade she'd never worn before, the shock was replaced by something worse: certainty. That night, she waited for Gustavo to return. The clock passed 10, then 11. When she finally heard the door open, her heart pounded in her chest, as if trying to escape. He walked in, dropped his keys on the table, and went straight to his room without even looking at her. Laura followed him, feeling each step way more than the last. When he started to take off his shirt, she let out the question that had been burning inside her for weeks. "You don't love me anymore, do you?" Gustavo stopped, still with his back to her, as if he didn't want to look at her. He took a deep breath before answering, but when he did, his words were a punch to the stomach. "Laura, you have to understand, I can't put my life on hold forever." It was then that she realized there were no more doubts, no empty hopes. There was only the naked and cruel truth, thrown in her face like a slap. He had already moved on. While I was fighting for my life, he had already given up on me. The confirmation came soon after, cruel and blunt. "I met someone." The sentence came without hesitation, as if he were commenting on the weather. The silence that followed was deafening. Laura felt her body weaken, her vision blurred. It couldn't be true. He couldn't be saying this now, but he was. As if that weren't enough, Gustavo still had the audacity to add, with an almost merciful tone, "I'm not going to leave you with nothing, Laura, but I can't do that." The pain was overwhelming, but something inside her refused to give in. As he spoke, justifying the unjustifiable, her mind was torn between anger and disbelief. He didn't apologize. He didn't try to hide it. He simply stated that he had already made up his mind, and then, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, he mentioned the name that would haunt Laura for days to come: Camila. Laura felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. The name Camila echoed in her mind like thunder, a sound impossible to ignore. She didn't want to ask, but the question escaped her lips. Before she could stop herself, "How long has it been?" Gustavo didn't even have the decency to hesitate. A few months. A few months. In other words, while she was sitting in hospital waiting rooms, swallowing the anguish between tests and diagnoses, he was building a new future without her. The man who had once held her hand at the altar now spoke, as if she were a burden that he had finally found the courage to let go of, and worst of all, he truly believed he was being fair. She wanted to scream, she wanted to throw something against the wall, she wanted to tell him he was a monster, but nothing came out. Only the heavy silence of a woman who realized, right then and there, that she had never really known the man she had married. He had not only betrayed her, he had erased her. While she still existed, while she was still struggling to survive, he had already said goodbye. And now, he spoke with that surgical coldness, as if he were resolving a bureaucratic issue. "You don't have much time, Laura. I need to move on." That was what he wanted to say. He already saw her as something in the past. But if he thought she would disappear without a fight, he was very wrong. Over the next few days, reality hit Laura with an unbearable weight. Gustavo wasn't just leaving her life, he was ripping away everything that had ever been a part of her. He came home later and later, and when he was home, he barely looked at her. His eyes would flare with irritation whenever she tried to talk, as if she were just an annoying reminder of something he wanted to forget. But the final blow came one cold day when she woke up too weak to get up and realized that Gustavo simply wasn't there. He hadn't left a note, hadn't sent a message, nothing, as if his absence made no difference at all. And then, when she thought she couldn't feel any more humiliated, Camila entered her house, without warning, without asking permission. as if she already owned everything. Laura was sitting on the couch when she heard the key in the lock. She thought it was Gustavo, but what she saw was much worse. A young, well-dressed woman with a cup of coffee in her hand and a smug smile on her lips. "It's nice to finally meet you," she said, as if this were a friendly visit and not an invasion of what was left of Laura's life. Laura felt her blood run cold. Camilla's boldness was absurd, as if she wasn't invading a sick woman's house, but merely taking over the space she already considered rightfully hers. With a weak but firm voice, Laura asked, "Who gave you these keys?" Camilla smiled, the kind of smile that didn't hide pride, just contempt disguised as sympathy. "Gustavo, of course. I'll be here for a while." The shock was accompanied by a bitter revolt. Laura tried to get up, but her body couldn't keep up with the fury boiling inside her. She felt trapped within her own weakness, while Camilla moved around the house as if she owned everything, but nothing prepared her for what came next. As if her mere presence there wasn't already a punch in the stomach, Camilla continued, her voice sweet and calculated. "I know it's hard for you, Laura, but the truth is that you don't have much time. Gustavo and we're building a future. He thought it would be good for me to get used to the house." The word future echoed in Laura's mind like an insult. They were planning a future together, while she didn't even know if she would have won tomorrow. But then came the cruelest blow. Camilla stepped forward and, without a hint of hesitation, said the thing that would change everything. "Felipe and Isabella will love me soon. You don't need to worry about them. I'll take care of everything." The pain Laura felt at that moment was not physical, but it was devastating. Cancer was already weakening her every day, but nothing compared to the despair of imagining her children being ripped away from her. Camilla didn't just want to take her home or her husband, she wanted to take her family. Her smile was that of someone who already saw herself as a replacement, as if Laura were just a temporary obstacle that would soon disappear. But what Camilla didn't know was that, even though the disease was robbing her of her strength, Laura still had something she would never lose: the love of her children. Felipe and Isabella had already felt the weight of their father's betrayal. They had seen Gustavo ignore his mother, treat her pain as an inconvenience, pretend that nothing was happening. And now, Camilla tried to infiltrate the house as a forced stepmother, as if her presence was inevitable. But she underestimated the loyalty of two children who knew exactly who their real mother was. They watched everything in silence, hidden behind the hallway door, absorbing every word of that strange woman who was trying to redesign their lives. And it was there, in that moment, that something changed inside them. If Laura was too weak to fight, they would fight for her. That night, the house felt colder than ever. Camilla settled in as if she already belonged there, walking through the rooms without rushing, opening cabinets, rearranging objects. Laura watched everything in silence, her stomach churning with disgust and helplessness. But while she tried to find the strength to react, Felipe and Isabella were already planning their own revolt. They didn't need words to understand each other. A look between the two was enough. They wouldn't let that woman become part of their lives. The first night was subtle. Small details that could seem like coincidences. Camilla woke up in the middle of the night, hearing whispers in the hallway. When she opened the door, she found nothing but emptiness. The next day, her favorite perfume, which she had carefully left in the bathroom, was gone. She searched the entire house, but found no trace. Later, when she opened her bag to get her lipstick, she found a headless doll inside. Felipe and Isabella pretended not to know anything. They just smiled. The following days were a series of small torments, each one more disturbing than the last. Camilla's cell phone charger mysteriously disappeared, and when she finally found it, it was inside the refrigerator. Her favorite dress was found lying in the backyard, covered in mud. One night, when she went to the kitchen to get water, she felt something sticky under her feet. Someone had spread honey on the floor. With each new coincidence, Camilla tried to maintain her composure, but Laura saw the beginnings of fear in her eyes. She wanted to play the mistress of the house, but the house was turning against her. Until one morning, Camilla woke up with a strange shiver. The room was dark, but she had the distinct feeling that she was not alone. She sat up in bed, her heart beating fast, and then she heard a whisper, low, soft, right next to the door. "This is my mother's house." Camilla jumped up, turned on the light, and ran to the hallway. The children's rooms were closed, and silence reigned. But when she returned to her own room, she smelled something burning. She looked at the nightstand and saw that the photo of her with Gustavo, one that she herself had placed there, was burned around the edges. Someone had found it, and someone wanted her to know that she would never be welcome there. The next morning, Camila didn't seem so confident anymore. Her smug smile was gone, replaced by quick, suspicious glances around the house. She was beginning to feel hemmed in, as if something invisible was pushing her out. But the worst was yet to come. When she opened her closet to get dressed, she found all her clothes piled on a chair, folded meticulously. On top was a note written in childish, cruelly direct handwriting. "Time to go." Camilla's blood ran cold. Gustavo tried to downplay it. "They're kids. You need to be more patient." But she wasn't an idiot. This wasn't just a tantrum between kids who didn't want a new stepmother. It was a war, and they were winning. That night, when Gustavo got home from work, he found Camila in the living room, her bags packed next to the couch. "What's this?" he asked, confused. Camila pressed her lips together, looked around the house as if she were facing a nightmare, and blurted out, "They'll never accept me. This house doesn't want me to stay." And then, without even saying goodbye, she left. Laura watched the scene from her bedroom door, feeling a silent satisfaction grow inside her. Camila might have entered her home with arrogance, but she left like a defeated intruder. Felipe and Isabella didn't need to shout or confront her directly. They simply made her presence there unbearable. And Gustavo, he looked dazed, as if he didn't understand how everything had gotten out of control. When he turned to Laura, waiting for some reaction, all she did was hold his gaze and say, with cutting calm, "I think now you understand what it means to be replaced." But Gustavo's downfall was just beginning. The next day, a video began to circulate among his co-workers. It was a clear record of him and Camila in an expensive restaurant, laughing together, while Laura was hospitalized. The video was accompanied by screenshots of messages exchanged between the two. Among them, one in particular stood out. "Laura hasn't even realized it yet, but soon everything will be mine." That was enough to cause a scandal. Gustavo's boss, a conservative man concerned about the company's image, didn't think twice before firing him. Gustavo's reputation was destroyed. The firing was just the beginning. The video spread quickly, reaching the parents of Felipe and Isabella's schoolmates. Within days, Gustavo had become a social outcast. The once respectful looks from his neighbors were now ones of contempt. His mothers avoided greeting him at the school gates, and his former co-workers didn't even respond to his messages. He tried to argue, tried to justify himself, but the evidence was irrefutable. He wasn't a man who had fallen in love with another woman. He was a traitor who abandoned his sick wife to have fun with his mistress, and no one could forgive that. And then came the final blow. When Gustavo tried to enter the house, he found the locks had been changed. Furious, he banged on the door, called Laura, and demanded an explanation. When she finally answered, her voice was cold and impassive. "This house was never yours, Gustavo. It belonged to my parents. Now it belongs to our children." His breath caught in his throat. "Laura, that's not fair." She let out a bitter laugh. "Oh dear, justice was never your concern, was it? Now enjoy this new life you wanted so much." Gustavo stood at the door for a few seconds, as if his brain refused to process what he had just heard. He tried to turn the doorknob once more, as if, out of sheer stubbornness, the lock would give in to his desperation. But nothing happened. He was now outside, literally and metaphorically. Homeless, jobless, familyless. The woman he had taken for granted was now an unreachable shadow. And the children he had neglected didn't even look at him when they walked through the school gates. He tried to appeal to Felipe, but the boy just stared at him with a coldness that didn't match his 13 years. "You've already replaced Mommy once. Now it's your turn." Laura watched everything through the window. She didn't feel sorry. She didn't feel remorse. Just a silent peace, like someone who had finally put the pieces of the puzzle in place. She had lost so much, almost everything. But what really mattered, what was truly hers, remained. Her children, her dignity, and her strength. She had survived cancer. She had survived betrayal and, above all, she had survived Gustavo. He, on the other hand, had not survived himself. When he realized that there was no one there for him anymore, that no one missed him, that he was a man alone in the world, he finally lowered his head and left. Days passed, and Gustavo's shadow dissipated like dust in the wind. Laura began to regain her energy, not only physically, but emotionally. Every morning she woke up next to Felipe, and Isabella was a reminder that her life didn't end when Gustavo decided to move on. In fact, that was when it truly began. Her treatment progressed well, and doctors began to talk about remission. For the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to dream of the future. A future in which she was the protagonist, and not a victim of a weak man's choices. Meanwhile, Gustavo was sinking into his own ruin. With no job, no money, and no support, he tried to reach out to Camila, but she had already moved on. "I don't need a broke man," was all she said before blocking him. The man who once thought he could abandon his family like he was changing clothes now had nothing but regret. And Laura, she didn't look back. One day, while drinking coffee on the porch, she felt the warm sun on her face and smiled. She had survived. Not just the illness, but the hell that Gustavo had tried to turn her life into. And now, what was left of her was something no one could take away: freedom.